Mike has joined.
Hi, Mike.
Hello. Mike has joined.
Mike.
Are we ready?
Start already?
All right, well, the only thing on the agenda is, we have to approve the minutes on the agenda for this then, or?
No, I don't have that on the agenda.
1,
All right.
We'll do that in the next one.
2, Julie Thornton. 3, Julie.
No, I don't.
4,
Kelsey Lincoln.
5,
Cool.
6. This is Chris.
Count through everybody that was already on there.
No.
Mike Galloway. 8, Mike.
All right. Well, I guess, on the agenda is to approve a temporary policy for use of sick leave during COVID-19 response.
Jennifer Ackerman has joined.
So do we want to get comments from Mike Galloway on this first, or
Sure.
since he's on? Mike, you want to give us some comments on our policy that as it was drawn up?
Yeah, is Kelsey on the phone too?
Yes,
So Kelsey's been working on this a lot too, and obviously helping with other counties, or with Hancock as Blake's been out. So she's been involved in working on a couple of these for both them, which their board just passed earlier today, and now that is before you. Just a couple preliminary comments, guys. This is seriously a temporary policy right now because there has been a lot of federal law changes that are set to take effect April 1st or April 2nd. There's even a debate on which date the law takes effect, but anyway, it's coming that we are preparing a comprehensive template policy that will incorporate all of those issues. So what we're doing right now is just to get us through. In the meantime, most counties, or a lot of counties, are adopting something to this effect that you have in front of you. I'm not going to necessarily read it all. Just recommendations on how we treat some things to make sure that we're providing isolation, self-quarantine, how we're going to compensate people in the interim, and how people that will be choosing to self-isolate or with the daycare school closures. I can tell you that as of April 1st or 2nd, we're going to say the 1st, how we treat people that are closing or having to stay home because of the closure of daycares and schools will change as it relates to how they're going to be paid. Part of the federal law is that employers will be required to give what I call bonus sick leave in the amount of 80 hours or a prorated amount for part-time employees, as well as extended family leave up to an additional 10 weeks for a total of 12 weeks. And that will also, there's a requirement that that will be paid. So I don't want to, that's not before you yet today, so I don't want to focus in on that. What we're doing is recommending that we just get a temporary policy in place prior to implementation of a former policy. You might ask, why aren't we just doing it at the same time? Because we're still waiting from guidance and information from the feds. So there's a lot of unknowns right now. Unfortunately, I don't like to call clients and tell them that there's a lot of unknowns, but there is a lot of unknowns right now that I don't have answers to questions. So we're assessing the situation. testing the law as we go and trying to make as good of informed decisions and recommendations that we can at this point. Chelsea, if I missed anything?
No, Mike, I would echo everything you said. Like you said, we've been working on this, as Hancock just adopted a similar policy, although I do believe theirs is a little bit different than this one. But for the most part, it's pretty much the same, but just something to get us through until that federal legislation comes through. Because we've been kind of inundated with questions from employees, about these scenarios.
Can I just ask real quick, if you're on the conference call, could you please mute your phone if you're not the one speaking?
This is Julie, and I have a question. This temporary policy that I have in front of me now, does that include my part-time people, since I'm the only office that has part-time people too?
Kelsey?
I'm not sure, what benefits your part-time employees get, I guess. Mike Galloway, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, but I would say that, so under the first bullet where we're doing a paid status or an administrative leave, they would be eligible for their normally scheduled hours under that portion. If it's another portion of the policy where they're being required to use some kind of paid leave, if they don't accrue paid leave, then it'll just be an unpaid leave status.
Okay, thank you, because I do have 2 employees that are working from home, because their grant still requires them to have some contact with the families that they are working with. So they're doing video chat, so they still are working.
Yeah, if they're remotely working, then you're just treating them like their hours worked.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Well, I think it reads for a temporary policy about as good as we can do. That's my opinion. We're giving them the flexibility of using their sick days where normally they wouldn't be able to. And it'll get us to that first of the month where things change then.
Yeah, it'll all be changed in less than a week, so.
I would hope the government's gonna reimburse us for that unfunded mandate, that they actually fund that mandate.
Yeah.
Well, let me just jump in on that. So there is no clarity on how there's been language that talks about tax credits. I know that doesn't help government probably, but there's also been where we don't have to pay certain employment taxes on some of this stuff, but the clarity on that is very gray at this point. So one of the things that this is clearly going to, especially for Carla in the payroll area, is when I'm talking to my auditors out there and I'm talking to chief financial officers in cities, we're going to have to engage our outside auditors once they are able to get through the law to understand tax consequences and how we do some certain things. Clearly, what we need to do in the interim is be able to track what leaves we're doing and why we're doing it so that when we get through, we can then come back and make some assessments. I guess it's kind of like a lot of things. How we document and track it is going to make it a lot easier when we finally determine what kind of reimbursement tax relief we get out of this. Maybe we don't have to pay FICA or things like that. But we need to be able to say that this was based upon the federal law. So I'll just point that out.
Okay.
Like, I thought I heard on the news this morning that they weren't gonna be reimbursing state governments, which, does that include the county governments too then? Have you heard anything like that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, Mike, I think you're probably correct. I wouldn't hold my breath on any type of reimbursements on this kind of stuff. A lot of this is working through, as I understand some of this, and you guys as counties know all too well through FEMA and how those processes work or don't work. I think our best hope is that in some of these paid leaves that we're going to have to be required to do pursuant to the federal law, that we're not going to have to, pay the FICA taxes on the law or on the leave or things like that. But for the most part, I'm going to bet that it's just going to be a cost we bear.
That's the way I thought I understood it. This is Bill, though. I don't want you to want.
Oh, sorry, Bill.
I don't want Mike to be embarrassed.
Sorry. I thought that was Mike's voice. I'm trying to guess voices. I think I know all of my boards and I can guess voices. I apologize.
Kevin, did you have something you want to say?
Can I get a clarification on my situation, Bill, with my employee?
This covers your employee as far as Kelsey's concerned.
What is, how so? Explain it to me. How does my concern is that he, in my direction, stayed home. Would have probably otherwise been to work.
Kevin, under the policy, an employee that has potential virus symptoms, which my understanding is the employee you're discussing did, would fall under that first category where he's not required to use accrued sick leave or accrued paid leave, but will remain on paid status for up to 14 days, per the recommendations of the Iowa Department of Public Health.
Okay, so he will not use his accrued sick leave. Do I understand that correctly?
That is correct, under this policy, correct.
Okay, perfect. That's why I needed clarified. Thank you.
This is Scott. I have a question.
Go ahead.
What is, kind of tying to Kevin's question, but this policy will be effective today if it's signed, I assume. I guess, how do we treat the payroll period ending today with the 2 weeks prior, in which, does this policy apply to that time, last couple weeks, where we've been sort of dealing with possible symptoms that are related to the virus?
Hey, Scott, have you had anybody that has stayed home?
I'm unaware of a specific circumstance for my department like that, so I can't say really.
Okay, so obviously that would only need addressed if there was in fact somebody that stayed home for those reasons, and I think that is just something the board will need to specify whether this will apply to that circumstance or not, if that makes sense.
And this is Mike, the board can make that very easily and just say, under number 1, because that's what we're dealing with of the paid leave, anybody that has in the last, couple weeks had this issue, it would apply to them. That means people were actually out because of any of these criteria. They were at that point having to use their sick leave. All we would do is just restore their sick leave, if that actually applied. Is that fair, Kelsey?
Yes, I would agree.
So you just want to make it retroactive to back like a couple weeks?
I guess the beginning of this current pay period would be the time that will be here reported shortly, and what I would have questions on, and we'll have to look through them all, but.
Yeah, this is Chris. This is Chris. I had one person out for one day that maybe normally wouldn't have been. So, but I don't know if she could submit proof. I know she did call the doctor.
Did she have the symptoms, the cough, the shortness of breath, and a fever? Those are the...
No. That's the criteria? Okay.
This is Jennifer. I know Carl is aware of the situation that I have. I'm wondering if this person would be paid.
That employee would also fall under this policy if the board retroacts this for 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you.
You'd almost have to say retroactive to the beginning of current pay period.
Yes, yep, I'm sorry. You're right,
2
Carrie.
weeks gets us into that past pay period.
Yep. I think it's also important to maybe point out that this that number 2, that people who choose to stay home just to stay home do not qualify under the provisions of number 1.
That's correct. They'd have to meet that criteria in that category 1 in order to get the paid leave without using any of their sick leave or vacation or whatever paid leave they have.
That is correct, and that's kind of a big issue. The other big issue, guys, that you want to make note of is, at least on mine it's highlighted, I don't know if it is on yours. It's kind of, I guess it's the 3rd or 4th paragraph from the bottom that starts, employees that commence travel out of state. This has kind of been a big issue, and I know we've done some modifications because of how close you guys are to the Minnesota border and where people may have health care. But we've had some situations where employees, and I hate to even say this, not in Winnebago, let me just say, but in other places, have said, oh, well, I guess I'll just go see my relatives in the state of Washington now because I have a vacation, and then I'll come back and stay home for 2 weeks with 14 days of pay. That's why you will see that we have prohibited that. And we're not prohibiting people from traveling. That's their call. But if they do it, then they're going to be quarantined when they come back, and they'll do it at their own risk, and they will have to be using vacation or unpaid leave, unless they become ill.
And I would just add to that, there is an exception in there that if you're traveling out of state for necessary medical care, like Galloway just said, I know a lot of our residents doctor in Minnesota.
So would we put this at the end if we were going to retroactive this pay period then? Effective,
Can it just be part of the motion, Kelsey, or do we need to?
I guess I think it can just be part of the motion, unless Galloway has a different opinion on that.
Nope, agree 100%.
Before you guys go any further, I just thought of one other scenario to bounce off you.
Who's speaking?
This is Scott from the engineer's office. We have one employee who lives in Minnesota. Does that, if he's just traveling between here and home, or, if he gets groceries up there, how do we handle that employee?
Well, I mean, it'd be different if he's going to the Twin Cities or something, but if he's just going around to his local, I mean, that's no different than us going around to our local towns. Anything within a 50-mile radius, I think, would be just about the same.
And Scott, we could add a line into the policy regarding that.
What I wonder is, are we restricting what he's allowed to do on his personal time, when he's at home, getting groceries, doing all those, necessary things?
This is Mike Astool.
Go
That, just keep in mind, all you guys that are on the line here, that somebody else trying to talk?
No, it's just you.
Oh, I'm sorry, I must have some feedback. Keep in mind that when we vote on this policy, that, we're probably not gonna cover every scenario. It's probably something will show up. Just keep in mind that we are gonna do everything we can to take care of the employees of Winnebago County.
And his normal circle, even though it's in Minnesota, is no different than our normal circles. So it's the whole area. Most of the Minnesota infections are in Minneapolis, so it's up in the city's area. But yeah, I mean, he's just like any of the rest of us. He just has to be responsible on where he goes.
I think what I don't even think you have to rewrite this policy, guys. This is Mike Galloway. I mean, when we look at that, employees that commence travel out of state on or after, the intent was this was for, you know, a voluntary, non-essential travel. When somebody lives there, I mean, and we've already agreed to that. I'm not, and I think that was Mike who said, you're right, these are living, breathing documents. We're trying to get this up. We can't, every scenario cannot be addressed. So clearly, I think I've heard the board's intent is this person, that provision isn't applying to them. It would apply to that person if they decided to go to Washington, D.C. and then come back, right? That's what we're thinking about here. When you're trying to, when you're increasing the potential for exposure and things like that, that's what we're trying to prohibit.
Very good.
Okay, ready to make the motion on it then, are we, or?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the temporary policy for use of sick leave during COVID-19 response and make it retroactive back to the beginning of the current pay period.
I will second that.
A motion from Derby and a second from Stensrud to adopt a temporary policy for use of sick leave during COVID-19 response, retroactive to the beginning of the current pay period.
2, Julie Thornton. 3,
All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay,
4,
Kelsey Bacon.
we stand adjourned.
5,
Thanks, everybody.
6,
Thanks,
Thank
Mike.
you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
7.
Mike?
That was annoying.
Yeah, well, whose bird was that? That was,
Yeah, it sounded like somebody was on the gazebo out here and the robins were chirping.
Well, I didn't know if there was something in the dispatch room that was doing that, or.
I've never